NYARI SAMUSHONGA. She is the CEO of We Think Code, a South African tech academy that operates in Joburg, Durban, and Cape Town. As an entrepreneur and tech executive, NYARI is passionate about seeing Africa take its place as a maker of cutting-edge technology. Today, we will have her talking about going the distance, navigating organizational growth when the journey is as important as the destination. NYARI, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Carolina. I'm excited to be here and just sending my greetings from Johannesburg, South Africa, where it's nice and sunny. So today, the talk that I want to share is about going the distance. And I think I'll start with a more interesting and slightly provocative image of myself 4 years ago, before COVID lockdowns messed up my running routine. That's me 200 meters from the finish line from my first half marathon. And the quote there is by T.S. Eliot, and it says, "Only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go." And I think the reason why I combined that image of me running in a talk about my leadership journey is really that sometimes leadership largely feels like it's that endurance journey. It's that thing that you sign up for on your own. And then when it gets really hard, you ask yourself, what was I thinking? And can I just stop this already? But if you continue to train and you work at it, it's incredibly rewarding. And in the same way that I find mental clarity and peace of mind from running and physical well-being in running, I also find that in leading, as I get better at it, as I get more experienced at it and find my way, I'm able to enjoy it more and it's fulfilling. And the fulfillment I have is something I wouldn't enjoy if I hadn't taken the risk in the first place, if I hadn't taken the chance to leave my home when no one was chasing me and run for 2 hours. And so the next quote I'll put up is one by Albert Einstein. And this is, try not to become a woman of success, but rather try to become a woman of value. And if I can stretch that metaphor a little longer of me running, I think of myself when I was much younger, when I was in high school. And athletics then was about competing. It was about the person next to me, and I wanted to be faster. When I was house captain, it was about making sure my team came first. But now, closer to 40 than I am to the teens I was then, it's a different story. I run for myself. I run for my fulfillment. I run for the value. I don't run for success and an accolade. And similar in my work, earlier in my career, I was climbing ladders. I wanted to pass this exam, get that degree, get this promotion, move to that job, get the salary. And that was the motivation. But as I've moved into leadership, what I've realized is that the weight of responsibility that comes with that has required a shift in my paradigm. And in the same way that I'm no longer running to beat the next person, I'm no longer leading to get a promotion. I'm leading to achieve success for the organization. I'm leading to achieve success for the team that I work with. I'm leading to find fulfillment in my work. And in many ways, I'm leading to try and see if I can leave a mark on this world that's worthwhile. And so with that, I'll share a bit about my adventures leading up to this moment, because my leadership journey is characterized by me jumping off cliffs and heading into waters without any real idea of how deep they are. And then there's some point somewhere in the middle of that whole experience where my feet haven't hit the ground and the surface is far away, and I panic and I think, oh my goodness, what was I doing? And so to some extent, it seemed like, I was just a sucker for punishment. I went for what was most difficult and I would never settle down. But then I looked closely, and then I looked closelier. And then I noticed that, no, there's actually a pattern to the work. For one, the work has meaning. So my journey into technology actually started when I shifted out of an 11-year career in accounting and finance. And the first role shift that I made went into ThoughtWorks. And at the time, coming from accounting, I was tired of being the regulator. I was tired of being the one when everybody else has been creative who comes and checks and says, what is that creativity worth? I wanted to be part of creating. And so I entered and kind of went back to the beginning. My mom was in a panic. This young woman who's currently made it and has a reputation as effective in her work is now going back to the starting line, because I knew nothing about tech. I hadn't studied it. Other than being a consumer of it, I had never really thought to build anything. But fast forward to a few years later in that environment, and I was able to combine many of my experiences in finance and the journey of learning technology to being a managing director of ThoughtWorks Africa. And so at that point in time, I was combining different experiences, and together they were creating much value for me. Something I had invested many years in building that business career could now be combined with a new thing that I had taken a chance on in learning technology, and I could head up an organization. But after a while, had to take a shift because I'm a fidgety type. And so left ThoughtWorks and founded Fold Left with some business partners, 2 business partners. And Fold Left was an entrepreneurial venture. And again, it was the first time in my life when I was owning my own business, when I was maybe taking charge of my own ship and moving away from a place where, yes, I had led, but I had led under the umbrella of someone else's direction. In Fold Left, we sat alone and we decided, well, where do we want to go? And if we're going to recruit and hire, we're recruiting and hiring people to go with us to a place that we chose. And when we create solutions for clients, we're creating the solutions that we choose to work in. And so that was another area of me seeking out value. And so through that journey from being an accountant at Deloitte to working at ThoughtWorks to now ultimately being an entrepreneur at Fold Left, I was able to combine these experiences and step out into We Think Code. And We Think Code is the first time that I step away from my journey in the corporate world to one in a nonprofit world, because We Think Code is a software development academy. It recruits youth from underserved communities, trains them to be software developers, and then afterwards pathways them into employment. So in many ways, the adventure of We Think Code was set up by everything that I had done up until that point. I had gone from being a person who understood business and finance to being a person who understood technology, and then growing into an executive who used her understanding of business and finance to deliver technology solutions as a leader in technology. And now here I was creating opportunities for young people that were left behind to actually move forward and join technology. So We Think Code had an audacious mission, and it's their mission that attracted my attention. Because remember, at this point in my life, I'm now interested in the value that I can contribute and no longer just climbing ladders and like, oh, I went from manager to senior manager and from senior manager to director and from director to, whatever comes after that. It was looking for meaning. And We Think Code was founded in a context in South Africa where, on the one hand, we had youth unemployment at like 55%. And South Africa is predominantly a youth population. 65% of the population is youth. So that's about 12 million people. And then 55% of those youth are unemployed. But at the same time, you had this situation in technology where when I was working at ThoughtWorks and I was leading Fold Left, we couldn't find enough talent to fill all the roles that were open. We Think Code came in to build a bridge between these two worlds. How do we tap into the youth that are not involved in the formal sector, train them in a sought after skill, being technology, and then pathway them to full-time employment? And so I heard that and I was like, that's really complicated, because the South African education system is very two-tiered. If you come from a household that's low income, it's likely that you're in a school that is under-resourced. It's likely that the teacher might not be really well prepared to train you. It's likely that there are not enough resources there, the class is too full, and there's so many barriers to your success. So in the end, when you're born into a low-income home, when you graduate high school, the chances that A, you've got the qualification to go to university are very low. The chances that B, if you have the qualification, you have the money to go to university are low. And We Think Code was saying, well, we think we can bridge this gap and identify talented youth, recruit them into technology, train them to be software developers, and then unleash them into the world so that they can create tech solutions. And so I signed up for that. In many ways, it felt like an answer to the call of duty. And that's why I chose to join the team, because I thought, well, who wouldn't want to be a part of that? But like with every big jump, it had a healthy dose of ignorance, because my view of the world, or in this context, my view of We Think Code was through rose-tinted glasses. We Think Code was interested in my participation because my history meant they could pivot from being a startup, they were founded in 2016, to now being a social enterprise. I joined in 2019. And my skill set meant I understood business in general, I understood technology, I understood the business of tech. And over the years, I had either volunteered in trying to get young people into technology, or as an executive, directed funds from the organizations that I led into training young people. And so they were looking for a change agent, where my rose-tinted glasses were saying, oh, it's all set up. We Think Code at that point, when I joined, was in 2 cities, in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. It had gone from recruiting 100 young people to recruiting 220. And 98% of the people they were recruiting were going into employment. So my rose-tinted glasses were saying, well, actually, you just need to copy paste, have more campuses in more cities with more students graduating with tech qualifications and entering the marketplace. And in so doing, Bob's your uncle. You've contributed value to you, value to the team, value to the beneficiary, value to South African corporates that needed the skills. But I got a rude awakening. Realizing the full scale of responsibility that signing up for this job actually was, winded me a little bit, if I'm to be honest. Because when I arrived on the ground, I realized that while we wanted to recruit inclusively, we were struggling to meet inclusion targets. Our women representation was very low. We were sitting at 16%. Our low income representation, which is the particular demographic for which we existed, was sitting at 30 to 40%. And largely, young middle-class youth who had many opportunities and pathways were catching on to this idea and joining the bandwagon and coming to this tuition-free academy and learning to be developers in a world-class context. Beyond that, not only were we struggling to recruit the right demographic, when it came to graduating, we were hoping to graduate 75% because we go through a quite intensive recruiting model that assesses for aptitude. But we weren't hitting 75%, we were hitting 60 at best. And in that 60, the demographic we were targeting, that low income group, those young women that we didn't have in the right numbers, were dropping out disproportionately. And so what we were intending to achieve is not really where the organization was sitting. And so this job to scale the impact, actually, it turns out, started with rebuilding certain foundations to be robust enough so that what we have could be built up. There was one silver lining. The individuals that came through the We Think Code model and did actually graduate, 98% of them were ending up in employment full-time as software developers. And remember the stats that I shared earlier. South Africa's youth unemployment is sitting at 55%. So to have a 98% chance of getting a job in the event that you graduate was an absolute game changer. If only it was a game changer for the demographic that was most disenfranchised by certain systemic inclusions, then we'd be getting it right. So the mission went from scale the impact to stabilize the foundation, then scale the impact. And so in this, we realized that truthfully, any growth of an organization is actually a change agent's job to shift it. And arriving in this ecosystem, I suddenly realized the weight of what needed to be done. So this talk today is really around my leadership journey within We Think Code, the lessons that I learned or that I had learned before that I applied, and how I can share this. And hopefully in your journey, this might also become quite useful. So here are my lessons on leading. When navigating organizational growth, the journey is as important as the destination. How we get there as a nonprofit, who we bring along on the journey, who our partners are, is as important as the point when one of our young people graduates and enters the world of work and absolutely changes the lives of their families. So my first lesson in leadership is clarify the purpose. An aspirational mission holds everyone together. And so when you look at it, my moving into We Think Code was that aspirational mission of training Africa's next generation of tech talent, of including previously disadvantaged individuals, inspired me. It didn't just inspire me, it inspired people who had been denied an opportunity. Not only that, it inspired corporates that had a problem in looking for talent to think, oh wow, I could kill 2 birds with 1 stone, address my talent shortage and make an impact on a life that otherwise would not have had an opportunity. But we quickly shift to lesson number 2, that while an inspirational mission is necessary, it's not sufficient. You've got to define the road to success. So my first rude awakening was actually because while we all knew we wanted inclusion, while we all knew we wanted to train young people, we were failing because we were not specific. Who are the young people we want to include? When we decide who the young people we want to include are, then we'll know what they specifically need. It's a painful moment when, as an organization, your goal is to close access gaps to digital training and to employment in general. And in reality, you're perpetuating the stereotypes that exist in the world. You're giving more access to those that have access. And maybe to some extent, you're actually dashing the dreams of young people that you've convinced you could transform their lives. And so here, my first responsibility was to get very clear that yes, we are converged on a big mission that's audacious, that is honorable, that is inspirational, but we need a clear road. And so the first thing that we did was we got specific and we said, who are the youth? So at this stage, we now have a clear definition of the income bracket of our primary demographic target, of the age of our primary demographic target, of the context they live in. It shifted everything. Our marketing money moved away from general social media posts into community radio stations that presented in local languages, into going in schools and townships that had young people that were in these underserved communities. But it had another step, which was we needed these young people to have a particular level of talent. Because remember, they were failing disproportionately in the program. And it could be one of two things. Either the program wasn't supporting them enough, or we were recruiting the wrong young people. There's also a third possibility that it could have been both. And so this is where you've got to take a position. Having defined a road to success, this is the youth demographic we are after. This is how old they are. This is what their household income is. And it's actually incredibly low. We don't understand how people are surviving on so little. But they've got to have a certain level of talent, which can become controversial in the nonprofit space, because a large part of what we try to do is work that's impactful, but the language tends to be a focus on the heartstrings. When you say, but the young person must be talented with an aptitude for coding, suddenly you're excluding someone in a world that exists because exclusion is rampant. So in a world where young people are not getting opportunities, suddenly we think code, the champion of inclusion, is coming out there and is separating out who of those that have been disenfranchised is more deserving. So take a position, even when it's risky, especially when it's risky, because that risk speaks to the fact that we're standing on shaky ground. And in our world, that shaky ground was manifesting in young people not doing as well as they needed to do. And they were not doing as well as they needed to do because we were not necessarily recruiting the young people that were the right ones. So the first position I took was, we've got to get stricter on this aptitude test. If people are not making a particular mark, then they can't get into the program. But it goes beyond that. When they enter the program, we've got to watch them closely. And we've got to hold ourselves accountable. If we say they're good enough to get in, and then when they get in, they're not doing well, it can't be because we didn't do enough. So the second big position that I took was that our curriculum needed to change. When We Think Code was founded, it used a proprietary curriculum that had been brought in from France. And at the time, that was a great idea. Anyone who's been in a startup, you're trying to get into the market, you're trying to get your feet on the ground, and you're trying to get going. Being able to use the proprietary solution allowed us to do that quickly. But what we quickly noted is that the South African education system, and I've shared the income inequality disparity and how it manifests in disparity in the education system, meant there were assumptions that a French curriculum could make about what an entry-level person joining our academy knew and what they didn't know. And the reality was those assumptions didn't hold true in our South Africa. And so we needed to change that curriculum. But it wasn't changing it to lower the standard. It was changing it to introduce fundamentals in the learning of software programming that our students otherwise would not have had. The second thing was the proprietary solution that we adopted was one centered around tech education. But our mission was clear. We wanted our young people not just competent in coding, we wanted them working. And in order for them to work, they needed to be work ready. That meant we needed to teach them more than just coding. And listening to quite a number of the talks today, they touch on the very things that make you ready for the workplace. Are you able to communicate? Are you able to collaborate with others? Are you able to express your technical ideas to non-technical people in ways where they understand where you're going? And so we needed to make this shift, because by not making the shift, we were letting down the demographic that we had set out to help. Remember, lesson 1, having that clear mission meant we knew what success meant, but we were not achieving success for our target demographic. And so this change in many ways seems risky on paper, but principally is a no-brainer. Boy, did we take heat. And especially the new CEO, who seems to have just come in with too much enthusiasm and sweep with her new brush. To certain prejudice, can an African academy develop a learning curriculum in Africa that can train up a world-class developer? And these are the prejudices that people hold somewhere deep in their heart, in those dark places where they can't express them. But as a leader, we wouldn't be true to the mission if I didn't hold to this position. And so I took the beatings as they came, a few sleepless nights questioning myself, because when you're under that much pushback, and when you're sitting there thinking, I'm not doing this for myself, I'm actually representing a demographic that has already been let down, you then wonder, are you being a bit too bold? Are you fighting a battle for the student or a battle for yourself? Is it for the cause or is it your ego? And I think in this way, I was governed by that mission to train a generation of people that had been left behind, and a clear step that said that demographic came from a group that wouldn't have a chance. And in knowing that, I knew that this curriculum would never meet them where they were to take them where we were promising we would get them to. And so that takes me to lesson 4, which is use conflict for good. Because when I took the position, and the position was risky, and I pulled together a team of people to build the solution, I was taking bobs from all sides. Would the corporate partners, remember the silver lining, that were recruiting 98% of our graduates, still believe in the academy when we had essentially taken out a big part of the airplane, claiming that it was still flying? And this was something that got me a lot of pushback from within. And in a context that's specific to what I was doing, I was the first CEO to take over from an operation that was run by the founders. And the founders had envisioned it a particular way. But as rubber hit the road and we started to measure certain things, we weren't achieving the goal. We were not getting the outcome we wanted because our how was not specific. And so this took me to the next step of managing the conflict. And the conflict was painful because the challenges were direct. They challenged my professionalism. They challenged my judgment. But there were 2 things that were important. The first one was that I not take this conflict personally, because in this context, the conflict was about the mission. Was this dramatic, significant, seismic shift that I was commissioning the right one? Would it help or would it hurt the cause? By keeping my mind open and remembering that it wasn't about me, I was able to receive the criticism and hold myself up to the light and say, which way are you going? There's another layer to this. I am that child at We Think Code that we're trying to train. I am the child who was able to be, I'm Zimbabwean, grew up in a different country, trained in a public school system, and had opportunities because they were made available to me that otherwise my parents could not have afforded to buy. And so I understood personally how not giving the right person the right opportunity meant that road to ruin was completely tiled with good intentions. We had to be realistic. And so that was the first thing, is not taking the conflict personally. But the second thing is taking a stand, which is when you're decisive and you understand the reasons why you're making a decision, you have to put on your big girl panties. You cannot be at that moment afraid to lead. And the conflict was so intense, at some point I offered to step down because my position was clear. I am here for this mission that you set and I was inspired by, and I answered the call to duty. And I clarified that mission by coming to well, how can we achieve it and specifying the target demographic? In so doing, their needs and the reason why we were failing them became clearer. And so the position I was taking was a principled position to serve the mission. And if the consensus in the room was that my position was wrong, then I rather stand down than pretentiously continue to lead an organization with a process that I didn't believe in. And that wasn't about ego, that wasn't about making a point, but it was about serving the truth as I understood it. And ultimately, I mean, I'm still here speaking to you, so that obviously neutralized and turned out well. But the importance of being decisive at the end of conflict, hear everybody out. Don't take things personally, take their ideas on board. But then once you've decided and you know what informs your decisions, then stand. No sensible person should follow a leader who doesn't know where they're going. A big part of your job as a leader is to know exactly the route you intend to take, because in taking that route, others can follow. And that takes me to the next lesson, which is the building of teams. Because my mandate was to scale this organization, understanding the mission, clarifying the road to success, making decisions on how we were going to get there, was also that we could then create a model that we could replicate at scale. And scale requires many hands, because many hands make light work. But we also know that too many cooks spoil the broth. So how do you resolve this conflict? At some point as a leader, you take responsibility for the path forward. But having taken the path forward, you must build a platform that gives others an opportunity to step up and join you. And building teams is one of the painful parts of leading that I don't know if we talk about enough. Yes, there are the parts about giving everybody an opportunity. Yes, there are the parts about hearing everybody out. There are all these positive things we talk about. We don't necessarily talk about the pain of saying no. The pain of being the one who holds the reins and has to look at a person and say, that is not going to measure up to the standard of where we want to go. We are not going to train up the top tech talent if we are not the top tech team. We have to level up. And when we level up, you start to see the things fracture. The next thing you realize is that in a startup, everyone is responsible for everything. There's an energy, there's a buzz. We sit down, we decide everything by committee, everyone plugs in, no job is too small for anyone, and no job is too big, and mission, 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 go, go, go. The truth is at scale, that's not sustainable. We need some level of clarity and silos. And in so doing, you start to get people feeling disempowered. They step up and they feel, oh, I was in charge of a lot of things, and now you're telling me I'm confined to one space. But the understanding is that one space for an organization that serves 100 people is different from one space for an organization that serves thousands of people. When we're serving 100 people, we can know them by name. We can know their families, where they live, their preferences, where they're going. But when there's thousands of them, we've got to rely on systems. And the team has to rise to the challenge where it is. And this was one of the more painful parts of growing this organization, which is essentially having to face people that initially looked like allies in change, when it was clear that their ceiling, their capacity for shift and change and disruption had been beaten. And in those moments, people felt betrayed by me. People felt like the mission had been lost. Where they began, where they ended, where the organization started and ended had become blurred. And yet in that, I still needed to find a way to set up a team that remembered the mission, remembered the path, the specifics, our target demographic, their needs, the positions we had taken, the decisions we were standing by, and could still look up and pledge allegiance, not to me, but to the mission, because teams are key. One of my prouder moments in building the team is that 40% of the people that work for We Think Code are actually We Think Code alumni. Because if we're recruiting top talent and we are training them effectively, then they must be good enough to solve our problems. But this success goes further. The lady who now leads the We Think Code recruiting team, who is a We Think Code alumni, is a young person who actually was empowered by the changes that came in with my leadership, the changes to who exactly we were recruiting and how exactly we were training them. Because she's a person who had failed to get in the first time, tried again and got in. And when she entered, faced a situation where the gap between what she had known as a person who had never coded before and what was required of her was too big and too fractured. And she struggled in the beginning. And she felt like the mission was right, but the specifics were letting us down. And so actually, it was a moment of vindication almost in realizing that here's a specific life that I've been able to touch that has now come on board and has taken the baton in terms of recruiting and is running with it. Under her custodianship, we're meeting our targets of low-income recruiting. Now 90% of the students that train with We Think Code come from the government definition of low income. 50% of the students that We Think Code recruits are young women. We have reached gender parity in an industry that globally has 20% women representation. But not only that, the motivation and the energy of the team is driven and moving forward and taking on the challenge of growth. We recently opened a new campus in Durban, and from the chaos we had with only 2 campuses, the smoothness of being able to build up a new one and deploy a team into that space shows the benefit of all the effort of leading decisively and clearly towards particular outcome. Lesson 7 for me is build systems. Scaled impact happens when success is repeatable. It can't be a fluke. We can't be shocked when it works. We've got to know and trust that it works. We've got to be able to switch it on and go to bed and trust that overnight that machine turns on and does what it should do. And essentially, in being able to clarify exactly what we needed, not only were we able to recruit and attract teams of people that knew exactly what they were supposed to do, we were able to set up systems that could take over a lot of the tedium of the work we were doing. Many of the people in this conference work in some way with technology and understand that technology can help you when your requirements are clear. The fluffier your requirements, the fluffier the solution, if it ever sees the light of production. But building systems requires that clear, decisive layering of where are we going? How will we get there? What is the road? What is the path? Who holds what? And what does success ultimately look like? And so my final lesson in leading is enjoy the journey. Take the time to celebrate the wins. You've earned them. Remember, we started with me running my first 21K, and it's a lot of hard work. But there's also that moment when you've done the training and you're in the zone and your muscles have all the memories of how to keep going, even when there's a burn. And in that moment, your mind is clear, the wind is on your face, and you feel strong. You feel like you can take on the world. You've got to savor that moment. You've got to breathe that air. And you've got to celebrate that the sacrifices were worth it because they brought you to this place. And so in parting, I'll say this. She who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow. And in this, I understand that if it's clear to me what is the purpose, what inspires me, then all the burdens, the backlash, the team stress, the disappointment, the doubt in my leadership, the making decisions that turned out to not be the right ones, is overtaken by the passion and joy of seeing young people come into We Think Code, train, do well, succeed, and go on to change their lives, their families' lives, and with the power of technology, the nation and maybe even the continent. And that's utterly fulfilling. It makes the journey of endurance well worth it. And so I'll leave that with you and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really enthusiastic, and I think a lot of us have gotten some enthusiasm from you, so thank you for that. The first comment in the question and answer tab is, this is the first session so far that I really enjoy. I like your enthusiasm, your energy, your approach, and practices to reach success. Congrats and keep it up. And this has gotten 5 upvotes already, so thank you so much for coming and cheering us towards success. Here is a question though. What would you suggest? How can we be mindful in interviewing and selecting candidates from different backgrounds without tokenizing them?
Oh, that's a powerful one. What I would say is I would go back to the mission and the vision. So the power of diversity is in literally that, is in the diversity of points of view. When I share my journey and my path in leadership, one of the things that I find so important is being able to lean on my experiences of being left out and not having access to resources, and how that informs an environment that is resource deprived. But also realizing that in the power of that experience, there are limitations. There are times when I'm excessively anxious because maybe I come from a background where there was so much scarcity. And so the power of sitting with a person who has a different experience is actually that they'll see that situation differently. So the first thing I think actually resides in the interviewer, in meaningfully understanding why you're seeking the diversity. Is it because, you're kind of under scrutiny, You were in the newspaper yesterday and someone pointed out that your board had no women. You got into a panic and you were quickly like, let me find a girl and throw her on the board. Because then, how do you interview? Like, what are you interviewing for? Maybe for a person who definitely looks like a woman, but will agree with everything you say. But if you genuinely at your core believe that this person will bring a perspective into your environment because of their diverse point of view, you sit there looking for difference from yourself. And then looking for alignment with your values. Because the key thing is you want the points of view to differ, but you want the mission and purpose to be aligned. So if we're all going after the same thing, the argument is a healthy argument because it's about which is the best way to get there. But if we're after different things, then the argument is a different one. I don't know if you've been at dinner and someone says something completely insane, whether it's sexist or homophobic, and you don't even argue because it's so far removed from your value system. You're like, where do I even begin to broach this with you? That's not what you're looking for in diversity. What you're looking for in diversity is an alignment on mission and values, but a difference in approach, different in point of view, difference in expertise. And so I think it starts with the interviewer understanding why they value diversity. Because if your motivations are superficial, it's likely that you're going to hire in chaos for yourself.
Thank you so much. And I would love to just stop and point out that this is a second very good time to point out that change usually happens when you start looking inward. This was a very good takeaway from yesterday's talks as well. So thank you for making that point. Can you share a time in your current position when you were struggling with motivation? How did you overcome that? Any tips to motivate a team when the team lead is also struggling with motivation?
Yeah. Oh, wow. So to give context, I shared about how when we were looking closely at the data, we realized that we were recruiting young people that were from a demographic that we were actively targeting. We were getting young people. And when I was saying low income, we also have extreme low income, which is a household. And a South African household will on average have 5 people. And the annual household income would be $5,000. So the entire household of 5 people is living for the whole year on $5,000. And we had managed to find young, talented youth, like really smart, cognitive driven people that were in that demographic group. And they were disproportionately failing. They were underperforming academically in the program. And that was gut-wrenching because I think one of the ways I like to approach it is first, do no harm. Don't go and promise someone that you can help them transform or achieve a change or an inflection if you can't. So at a minimum, whether a student graduates or doesn't graduate, my hope is that their experience with We Think Code made them a better person, gave them a good experience in some way. And so to look at those statistics, I very personally felt like I had let some real people down that had counted on the organization that I was leading to make a shift. And so that was a low. It was emotionally, it was a low. Professionally, it was a low. And it drove us to one of the big changes, which was shifting the curriculum. And that was the scary change because one of the areas where the data was looking good was our placements on graduates, which meant that the program we were graduating them on was sought after in the market. But because that program was letting down the demographic we were targeting, we needed to change it. So it was incredibly risky and scary. And at a low moment when your energy is low, to take such a bold decision and then face a lot of backlash on, oh, this is too risky, that's not the right thing to do, etc., was really tough. But I think I dug in and looked at it and thought, well, this is what I signed up for. This is what I'm here to do. And I signed up because I felt I had something to contribute to this conversation. So this is not the moment to succumb to my own, despair. Rather, like I said, this is the time to put on your big girl panties and step up and lead because this is where breakthroughs happen. And in truth, in hindsight, that demographic has shifted and is now operating and performing at par. And we're recruiting larger proportions of it because we are confident that we can serve. And so I think that's what it was. It was definitely very depressing because it was literally a failure of mission. And it was important, but we turned it around. And then to the next question of when a team lead is really struggling, I think, you know, people struggle for different reasons. And there's this whole debate of, do you bring your whole self to work? And it's like, okay, bring your whole self, but sort of not really your whole self, because some of your other stuff we don't really want to know. Um, and so when your team lead struggles, you kind of approach it. And as a leader, you walk in kind of sideways, like, okay, I'm asking what's going to come out. But I think the reality is, first start from a place of empathy, because I've just shared a place where I felt deeply like I was failing. And I was being honest with myself that if this is the mission and you're the leader and this is what's happening, you're failing. I didn't immediately fire myself. I didn't sit myself in front of a mirror and hurl insults at myself. I didn't rattle off all the other times I had failed and emphasize that this is why you're failing again. Instead, I was very empathetic with myself and saying, well, what are you trying to do and why is it failing and where can you find information? And I think that's the similar approach to interacting with the team lead, is a place of empathy, which is, if I start with the assumption, which is, I think, a healthy assumption, you're a good person and you're trying your best to achieve the best outcome, and yet we're not getting it, then it's really a conversation of troubleshooting together. And maybe in that moment you're overwhelmed as a team lead, so you can't see the forest for the trees anymore. My job is help you pull back and say, well, what's going on? And then how do we lessen that overwhelm in the short term so that you can see again? How do we create some short-term wins for you so that you can rebuild your confidence? How do we give you some tooling that helps you to troubleshoot and supports you to be able to move forward? And then more painfully sometimes, how do we come to a place where we might need to acknowledge that as a team lead, maybe this isn't the right role for you. Maybe because of something that's happening on personally or professionally, this isn't right. But that should be the last resort. And we know it's the right thing when we go through the entire journey with sincerity and empathy, where it's like, no, we're genuinely trying to make this work, but we have to hold each other accountable. Then walk the full journey and then see where you land up. And I find most times people have the answers. We just, we get stuck. We all get messed up in the head when we're not doing well. And so if you can give someone some head space and some emotional space to find themselves again, usually they can rise up and take off.
I love that. Thank you so much. Here are a couple more people are cheering you on and thanking you for the amazing talk. So thanks again. Here's a question. How do you benchmark the progress of recruits? What practices can you recommend to find the right moment to evaluate if they can live up to expectations towards them? And for example, don't let go so early. Or don't let somebody go early.
I absolutely get that. And in our context especially, because like I said, we're actively recruiting young people that have never coded before. So day one is hard and it's unfamiliar. And there's a few things that we try to incorporate. One is, if something is hard, do it often. Failing is hard. Fail often. Get used to the idea that you are not your code, you are not your failure. You are a whole human with worth, and your failures are something that happened on your journey. And so, to some extent, we actually encourage early, frequent evaluation. This idea that evaluation isn't about telling you what you're worth, but is about clarifying the roadmap of where you need to focus. A personal trainer of mine from many years back used to say, we don't go to the gym to work on where we're strong. We go to the gym to work on where we're weak. So we go there to get into the positions that our bodies are not used to, because that's how we get stronger. And so one of the things we try to move towards is using testing as a way of saying, well, this is the part you're getting and this is the part you're not getting. So it's actually a map. Whereas if we shy away from testing because it's scary, then you struggle, but we don't know. So we don't know where to help you. We need to know because we want to help. And so in the beginning of the program, our students actually deliver work in iterations that are weekly. It's very small projects with fundamental requirements, and every week they must deliver. And the idea is get used to, one, having a deadline, two, just trying and submitting even when it's too much, three, getting feedback. And then in the first 4 months, you don't get exited. All you get is feedback and support. And the first support is like, well, go and try and help yourself in this way, read these things. The second layer of support is attend this mandatory workshop, because it's covering the areas where you're struggling. And the next one is a one-on-one with a tech mentor who's trying to help you get through. And then if after those interventions, you still aren't able to make it, then you would be academically excluded. But I guess it's a theme similar to the one I was sharing with the team lead, which is it's this idea that failure is not always the end point. Often it's the beginning point where we realize we need some information. So how do we get a bunch of information is we test. And we test both with standardized tests, like with a HackCorrect type test where we get a specific answer, yes, no, but also with projects where you get to do a bunch of stuff and we're able to evaluate, oh, it's not that you know nothing, right. It's that you don't know all the pieces. So work harder and get more. I hope that answers the question. It was a bit long-winded.
Yes, I think so. Thank you so much for this really exciting talk. I would like to show you our present for you. We will be sending this to you
lovely.
In the mail. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your experience and connecting with our audience so well. And I hope you can stay for the rest of the conference.
Absolutely. It was an honor to be here. And thank you to the audience for sitting through the talk.